If I had the opportunity to have dinner with one person associated with comic books in history, it would be Alex Schomburg. Unfortunately, he passed away in the late 1990s, but I literally get to talk with people who have his DNA and spent a lot of time with him.
Hi, I'm Susan Schomburg.
And hi, I'm Alicia Schomburg Matheson.
And hi, I'm Keston from Keston's Old School Comic Books, and I am thrilled to be speaking with granddaughters of Alex Schomburg. So I want to pose the first question to you two, and that is, how did you spend time with your grandfather?
All right. So I should just put it out there that I had no idea what a phenomenal artist my grandfather was. Our grandparents were our babysitters, and they would travel, to our home. There were 4 kids in our family, and babysit us. And my grandpa would always come with a piece of long butcher paper, all in a rubber banded. And at some point during babysitting, he would tape it to the family room wall, and he would ask each of us what we wanted to draw that afternoon. And he would then outline it for each of us, what our desire was. And we'd spend the rest of the afternoon coloring it in. But like I say, we thought that everyone's grandparents, specifically the grandfathers, could draw until my next door neighbor's grandparents babysat us. I'm like, when do we get to do the art project? And they looked at me like I had 6 heads. They had no idea what I was talking about.
So just to add on to that, for me, I remember when I knew what a talented artist he really was when I was 7 years old. I used to love the show, The Bionic Woman, with Farrah Fawcett. And I was about 7 years old, and I said, "Hey, Grandpa, can you draw me Farrah Fawcett?" And he grabbed a pencil and a sheet of white paper, and he drew the most amazing Farrah Fawcett within minutes. And I just thought, wow. How do you know how to do that? Another thing I think when I was younger, I was sort of fixated on horses. So I always had him draw me a horse. Every time he came over, I'd say, "Grandpa, can you draw me a horse?" And then my whole life, he would, draw me these horses. And then I went away to college, and I remember I wrote him kind of a heartfelt letter. And sure enough, in my mailbox, a few weeks later came this little letter from him, and it said, "Well, the pony's getting old, and so is Grandpa." And he drew me a show horse with this saggy, wrinkled skin, and like the hat was falling off, and it was like, he was really funny. Like, it was good humor. And I was like, I think I still have that letter. I'm sure I do. It was very special. Because he didn't like growing older. He that wasn't his thing. I think he wished he could have stayed young forever.
When did you all realize that he was a world-renowned comic book cover artist?
That's a tricky question. I do remember, I remember vaguely, like, early memories of being at like a Comic Con in the Golden Circle, hiding under a table somewhere. like to me, the comic conventions were sort of, too many people around, and what's going on here. I was pretty young, and but then I realized I think he seems important at this at this meeting of all these people.
Like Alicia said, I remember being at a Comic Con it would have been Portland, which is where we grew up, Portland area. My grandpa's there with Stanley, and it was either my grandpa's birthday or Stan's birthday. I can't remember which. But again, and I still remember Stanley stabbing the cake. It was the funniest picture with Stan and my grandpa. But to us, this, it was just a friend of my grandpa's. Like, we didn't even really know how important Stan Lee was. If that, it probably sounds bizarre to people hearing us say this right now, yeah. but truly, I mean, they were, my grandpa was a very humble man, very, very humble. And he would be the last person to draw attention to himself. I mean, he would always like to listen to other people's lives and ask them questions and really learn about other people. He had very little ego. He was truly a gentleman.
I'm so happy now to blow his horn and toot my horn for him, because like, I'm so proud of what he did and proud of his accomplishments, and moving through those eras of time as a working artist is amazing. That he supported his family with his talent. Like, that is just incredible to me. He was so persistent. Like, he never, I mean, even going through some of his letters and archives, we have carbons of some of these letters, and he just wrote letter after letter. I'm an artist. I would like to illustrate this. I can do this. I can, really, truly, like, really meticulous with his correspondence and making his life work in the art industry. It was really a lot of work behind the scenes.
Mm-hmm.
And he was a meticulous researcher. Some of the spaceships that he designed artistically were things that NASA was in the process of designing that hadn't even been created yet. And they were all in technical journals. And he would go down to the Portland Library and do the research and try to imagine what it was they were envisioning, because there were no pictures. They were all written descriptions.
In one of the paintings that I had, it was the Arthur C. Clarke Challenge of the Sea painting. If you look at the conduits with the electrical wiring, like he said, he got a magnifying glass and you could actually see that, like, the actual wire coupling was correct to what that type of telescope would have or something, to the minutest detail, it's correct.
So meticulous.
Folks who watch my channel a lot know that we focus on a lot of Alex Schomburg's work in comic books, and it was basically the entire decade of the 40s. Many folks in comic books don't know the work that he did outside. And so would y'all mind kind of laying out his career, maybe in like a minute, about where it started and like how long he worked as an artist?
What I recall hearing my grandfather say, was he was putting together a radio set in New York City, which is where he and my grandmother and father lived. And there was a mistake in the diagram instructions. So he went down to the headquarters, which were in New York City. It was much more accessible than what one would be able to do nowadays. Hugo Gernsback was there. He was regarded as the father of science fiction. And my grandfather had a conversation with him, as it turned out, and he got his first drawing assignment, so to speak. This was like moonlighting. This is not my grandfather's livelihood in New York City. He was in the entertainment business doing film trailers, which would be the
screen service
for National Screen Service. He did that for at least a decade. And so the comic books was just moonlighting on the side. Also sometimes worked for competing publishers. This is another thing. So some of the covers are signed Xela, which Xela, which is Alex spelled backwards, so that the competitor publisher wouldn't know that he was doing work for other publishers. And he was the first artist that Stanley Kubrick hired to work on what became the movie 2001: A Space Odyssey.
It's interesting because I think he lived in New York and was on the production team and was the creative side of preliminary kind of how the landscapes would look, how the movie would look. What did he call Stanley Kubrick? He called him like the big man, or the man, or there was some quote he would call him in his letters home that, oh, I met with the man today or something. And then he ended up moving production back to England at a certain point. Stanley Kubrick didn't want to be in New York anymore. And at that point, my grandpa had to make a choice whether he would follow the production or go back home to the family. And he chose the family. And I think that was probably a big life lesson and a big, turning point, disappointment maybe for him, that he wasn't able to do that, to kind of leave Oregon and everybody behind. So
our grandfather was represented by the Scott Meredith Agency, which was a literary agency in New York City. And they represented authors. Our grandfather was the only artist represented by the Scott Meredith Literary Agency. And it was the agency that represented Arthur C. Clarke. And so when Kubrick was looking for sci-fi, people to work on what became 2001, because it had no name when they were coming up with concepts. Arthur C. Clarke told Scott Meredith, who then relayed to Kubrick, it's like, Schomburg, that we'll reach out to Schomburg, see if he's interested.
Susan, you were kind enough to show me a few listings of your grandfather's work on Heritage. I was like, you know what? I'm going to go after this painting hard, and I'm going to put in the range of the estimate, I'm going to go at the very top of the range. And I wasn't even close.
Thank you. No, we appreciate that. Yeah, there was a lot of interest in that piece and the other ones as well. And that piece, World at Bay, just beautiful imagery.
So I want to dive into y'all's preferences. So you've spent a lot of time looking at your grandfather's work. And I was wondering if you had a favorite, first, a favorite comic book cover, and then second, maybe something that's not comic book related that you enjoyed. So let's start with the comic books.
I don't have a particular cover myself. I love it when there's a serious damsel in distress and, which there's a lot of that. Honestly, Grandpa loved women. There was no question about it. He wanted them to be safe, but they were always in a precarious position. And then as far as the other works, his oil paintings are beautiful. Like nobody would really have access to that idea of how beautiful his oil paintings are. I grew up with, the oil painting in his guest bedroom as a little girl when we would stay overnight looking at that painting. That one's called August Noon. There are references to it in his book Chroma, basically showing a slice of your life when you're a young person, and then it glimpses to the side with the elderly couple. And I mean, all of his oil paintings are beautiful use of color.
I don't have a favorite comic book. I mean, there were over 600 of them. I just enjoy looking at the detail and how he could cram so much into the confines of a comic book cover. One of my favorites is a biographical painting, Tuxedo Park, and it depicts the farm stand that they used to stop at on the way from New York City to their lake house at Greenwood Lake, and pick up eggs and things like that. And all the family members are depicted in it. And I should say, my grandparents' house, his sci-fi and all the other things that he did, they were traditional paintings that were in their home. The sci-fi was, carefully stored, but it was never, on the walls of the house. You would never know that he was a comic book or sci-fi artist.
But it was always like beautiful. Like I think back to his home when I was little, it was painted like bright pink on the outside. And he always tried to add a bay window and a trellis and roses and a fountain. And like, he always made a point to make it very lovely, whatever space.
Aesthetically appealing. Yeah.
Yeah. There was no lack of color. I did see him working when he would sometimes work in the back bedroom instead of the studio. He would always wear like this orange shirt with a tartan tie and like khaki trousers and like a blue cardigan or something. And so I always grew up knowing that he liked color. So I still have those shirts. Once in a while, I'll wear Grandpa's shirt and I'll just hang out in it because it's special, like no lack of color.
I didn't want to come to this conversation empty-handed. I just got this, actually. It's kind of cool. But this is one of his better known World War II covers. In fact, I think this is the best World War II cover there is out of all the Golden Age, any artist.
Which number one is that? Which Marvel Comics one is it?
So this is Marvel Mystery Comics number 40. And it's the Zeppelin cover.
Right.
And this is came out in 1943. And this is only a few years after the Hindenburg came down. So I just thought it was such a wise sort of creative way to get eyeballs on the comic book. And you saw this like the Human Torch going through this Hindenburg type blimp. This is so exciting. And he had this way of having a lot of detail and business in the background, but would always make the superheroes larger than life.
That's so
awesome.
Good. I've heard that about him, that he just did not follow one single rule of perspective when it came to those covers. He didn't care to get the ratios or anything. It was just all about action, and he made it work so that it looked correct, even though nothing was to scale, nothing was right. The perspectives were always his own eyes, making it look action-packed, and that was one of his talents.
And to your points too, you're talking about like the intricacy in which he would draw circuitry, for example, in sci-fi books. Same thing in comic books too. It's just like a little corner of a comic book cover, and you can just look at that for about 5 minutes to figure out what's going on. So it's wonderful. Well, let me move on to the next question here. And this is more about you all. So like as people, like how have you been influenced by your grandfather over time?
I was influenced by my grandfather, having a deep art interest. I worked in the art world in Los Angeles for several years before I opened my own gallery in Santa Monica, which I ran for 16 years. And I felt very comfortable in the art world, having grown up around it because of my grandfather. And one of the galleries I worked at prior to opening my own gallery, I was their research director. And we were trying to find paintings to buy by descendants of artists. And I really felt, or I was told that I approached people in a comfortable manner. I am credited for that because of having been my grandfather's granddaughter. I knew how to approach families so that they wouldn't be offended or paranoid about why they were being reached out to, which we were. I remember when my grandfather died, literally the day of the funeral, I'll never forget, an art dealer from Chicago called my parents' home and wanted to buy my grandpa's art. And it was just lacked so much tact. And I think that had that person, grown up in an art world around someone who was an artist, they wouldn't have committed that huge faux pas.
I had such a special, close relationship with him. It really set the stage for me to value kind of older generation. I work in healthcare, and I really do value my patients of a certain age. I really connect with them easily. I find it really satisfying to know their story, and I take time to know their story. It's important. And I took the time with my own grandfather to have that relationship. So I guess mine is kind of more sentimental. I do love to draw or paint. People want me on their Pictionary team 100% of the time. So I've got a little of that. I have a bit of talent, but I haven't really had time to explore that side of it. But I think it's more about just valuing the relationship with older populations and really trying to connect and have them feel special about what they've done in their life.
I think also, who he was as a human being was something to aspire to. He was not only talented and curious, but he was a very loving man. And he and our grandmother were married for 50 years before she passed. And, she had Alzheimer's in her old age. And my grandfather was so loving and caring to her until she passed. And seeing that humanity and the kindness that he extended to her was an amazing example.
Is there anything else about your grandfather that comes to mind and maybe I haven't asked the right question about?
Well, he loved women, that's for sure. We were talking about the damsel in distress. He was just funny about it. Like, he loved the figures and, it's hard to describe.
And a lot of people don't realize that his first language was Spanish. He was orphaned at a young age, 11 years old, and came to New York City from Puerto Rico. Our last name is Schomburg, so most people wouldn't draw the connection to Puerto Rico. But he came, he learned English, he learned to draw, paint. He's completely self-made, self-taught as an artist, and had a phenomenal career despite being an orphan.
It's amazing that he knew so well how to be a father and a grandfather when he himself grew up without any parents to set that example for him.
Yeah, Christmas at our house was
like
off
next
the charts.
He used to make like his own table runners and have these ornate like decorations, and the tree was always classy and lovely. And he kept with it, like even in his elder years when he couldn't really get around much, he always managed to make it feel special. And he would often say, like how he would say, "Oh, getting old is for the birds." He always said, "Santa's a little skinny this year."
And I remember when our brother was very much into trains, and he actually painted and created the tracks.
Well, everything became sort of custom on some level. Like we always had a mailbox that was beautifully painted with our name on the, like things were.
Or toy chests. They were beautifully created.
Yeah, I found a horse stable, like for a children's toy horse. And it said Sunshine on the side, and it had all this painting all over, beautifully painted. Like he always took time to make our things more special.
Handmade toys.
Well, and he was a carpenter as well. I guess that's something that, it would be interesting to note that he built his beach cottage on the Oregon coast. It was framed, and then he and my dad finished it. And whenever I have friends down there, they always comment because it has this huge stairwell. And in that era, he took plywood. And this is probably now in Dwell magazine, I'm sure. But he took plywood and had it precision cut into perfect squares, massive precision squares. And then he stained them different colors. So it's like this quilt as you walk up the stairs of this really warm color. So the sun comes in and it's just like this warm sea of wood, but it's literally plywood. My friends are like, how do I do that? How do I make it look so beautiful? I'm like, oh, Grandpa had a way.
If viewers want to learn more about Alex Schomburg and his legacy, how might they do that?
One place would be to go to the alexschomburg.com website. We're not the greatest at keeping it updated, but there is a little bit of information there. There's also the book Chroma that was written by John Gustafson.
I so appreciate people who are fans. I think my grandpa would be so happy to know that people were enjoying his art. We do have a quote that he said when he did an exhibition at Whitman College in Walla Walla, Washington, where Susan and I went to college, and the art gallery there had an exhibit of his work. And he gave a little speech and he said, you know what? I did it for the love of the art. I didn't do it for money. Not once did I do it for money. I did it for the love of the art. So any fans out there, sometimes at night I can't sleep and I Google Alex Schomburg and I enjoy seeing the super fans. And Keston, I think I've come across your thing a few times and I just kind of think, oh, I just love that people are enjoying his work. He would love that.
Thank you so much. What an honor to have you two on the channel, and the viewers out there. I hope you enjoyed to get this rare glimpse into the life of Alex Schomburg. Thanks so much for watching. If you really enjoyed the content, consider subscribing, and I hope to see you around real soon.